right now? Good? Alright. Is this okay? I haven't been able to hear very well myself, so let's talk once. Okay, thank you very much. I haven't had many microphone lessons in my life, so now is a very good time to start. So I have bad news and good news. The bad news is I'm not going to tell you who is John Galt. You need to go buy a copy of Atlas Shrugged and read it or reread it to find that out. The good news is I'm going to try to answer what I think is the most immediate and most important question facing as if our Tea Parties today. And that is, what do we stand for? We know that we are against all the things we've been talking about today, and it's very important to identify how bad these things are and why they're so bad. But we also need to know what kind of government are we for? Otherwise, what are we going to accomplish in action? Now you might say, well, we already don't know what kind of government we should be for anyway, right? Limited government. Well, yes and no. We should be for limited government if it's a really, actually limited government in the sense of the Founding Fathers. The problem is that the term limited government today is basically used by any politician who wants street cred among anyone who is in favor of freedom. And therefore, George W. Bush, who presided over the greatest amount of welfare spending and government control of industry in the history of America, is called an advocate of limited government and free markets. Now, if we're going to hold the Tea Party, we need to stand for limited government as advocated by the Founding Fathers. And we need to understand why that's right and how it's the solution to all the problems we face today, by both educating ourselves on the works of the founders and of great thinkers who agree with their basic ideas and defended them even more. And here, I would recommend very highly Ayn Rand as the greatest of them all. But if we want to go back to the good old days of George Bush, or George W. Bush, or Bill Clinton, or anyone else who preached free markets but made them less free, then we shouldn't call ourselves a Tea Party. We have no right to. We should call ourselves a compassionate conservative party. We should call ourselves a New Deal party. We should call ourselves a Jimmy Carter Malaise party. But we shouldn't call ourselves a Tea Party unless we advocate the kind of government that the original Tea Partiers advocated. So let's talk about that. What is limited government and why is it right? Well, limited government, the first question is limited to what? And the basic answer can be found in the Declaration of Independence. Thomas Jefferson talks about our unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And the Constitution describes many of our other rights, including free speech, property, etc. But the key part here is that government says, that Jefferson says, to secure these rights, governments are instituted in effect. So there's the answer. That's the purpose of government. It's to secure these rights. That's it. Nothing more, nothing less. The government is there as your bodyguard to secure your individual rights. It is not there as your parent. It is not there as your rich uncle. Now, unfortunately, our exploration into political philosophy isn't over yet, because we need to be clear what exactly are individual rights. This is another issue where the term is thrown around left and right, but it's used in all kinds of different ways. So again, let's look at it. Rights are freedoms of action. Action is the important word. Freedoms of action without interference by others. They are not claims on the lives and property of other people. So let's look at the right to free speech. The right to free speech means that I have a right. I'm a writer for a living, so I have a right to write whatever I want. It doesn't mean you have to read it, and it doesn't mean that I have a right to a column in the New York Times. By the same token, I have a right to the pursuit of happiness, so I can go out in the world and try to find my dream girl and get her to marry me. But if she doesn't want to, I don't have a right to marry her. This isn't Pakistan. And the same thing is true with everything else we've been talking about. You do not have a right to medical care. You have a right to earn your own medical care and take care of your own health. That's what rights are. And the system established by the Founding Fathers, while it did not protect rights 100% across the board, and of course, our greatest tragedy in this respect was slavery, which we paid for with 600,000 of our fellow Americans dying on a battlefield. We did protect rights, including economic rights, more than any nation in history. We had rights across the board, and therefore we had a society that looks nothing like our society today. For instance, let's say you want to start a business. Well, you actually were allowed to start a business. You didn't have to spend 6 months begging the zoning board for permission to run a business. Let's say you wanted to drill for oil. Well, you could actually buy a piece of property and drill for oil and produce energy. Imagine that. This is just free across the board. You know, you could hire people, you could fire people, you could work for whomever you want. It was a nation of total economic freedom, of laissez-faire, hands-off. Now, most people today, upon hearing this kind of description, would think, wow, that must have led to something horrific. And in fact, you know, most college professors would tell them that. I mean, if people were left free, and if they were actually left responsible for their own lives, that would be a catastrophe. People would be starving in the streets. They would all be poor. They wouldn't be able to afford anything. It would be chaos if we didn't have Ben Bernanke, you know, devaluing our currency. How could we get medical care unless a community organizer told doctors how to conduct medicine? So we don't, but most people think that a free market leads to devastation and injustice. Well, it doesn't. It didn't. The freest market in history directly led to the greatest improvement in human life in human history in the United States of America in the 19th century. That is 100% fact. And this was not just for some rich people. It was especially for poor people. It was across the board. People who in the early 1800s couldn't see at night. You know, America at night used to look like North Korea at night. By the end of the century, thanks to industrialists like John Rockefeller and Thomas Edison, it looked like Las Vegas at night with all the lights, so everyone could see and enjoy their lives. The list goes on. People were eating moldy vegetables. They went to refrigerated food. People couldn't, you know, some people never got 5 miles away from their house. Then they were driving automobiles. People were working 16, 18-hour back-breaking workdays. The productivity of capitalism wasn't some magical government. The productivity of capitalism is what created the 8-hour workday. And not only that, not only did it make us the most prosperous people in history across the board, coming up from poverty. So whenever anyone tells you about poverty, remember that we were poor. Everyone's poor to begin with in history. It's America that made people rich. So people who blame capitalism on the rich, on America, I'm sorry, people who blame poverty on America, that's absurd. But not only did it make us rich, richer than any king had ever been 200 years ago with all the things that the common man could afford, but culturally, it made us into a nation of free, responsible, self-reliant, happy, proud Americans. Kind of rugged individualism that we wish we had more of. If we ever hear about Horatio Alger stories, you know, you could say in the old days, every day in America was Independence Day because of our way of life. Well, today, every day is Dependence Day, except for today. So, those are the facts about the protection of individual rights. If you want to know what a good economic policy is, look to the Founding Fathers and look to the pro-capitalist thinkers. It's all about protecting rights. The last thing I want to stress is we need to understand why rights are right, why they're good. Because I think a lot of people who have tried to defend free markets haven't really understood free markets. And they're asking, you know, why are free markets so good and so successful? They'll say, well, it's an invisible hand, which is really not an accurate reflection of Adam Smith's view. Or they'll say even worse, well, you know, communism is a noble ideal, but unfortunately man is not good enough to put it into practice. No, communism is a horrible ideal and man is way too good for it.